Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama on Rajya Sabha Television with me, Frank Pereira. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have taken place around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. Paris terror mastermind shot dead in intensive crackdown on suspected accomplices around the city. Police conducts nearly 170 raids, arrests dozens. France steps up airstrikes against Islamic State targets in Syria. Terrorist brutality comes to light again, this time in Mali. Heavily armed men storm into a luxury hotel, firing indiscriminately. 27 killed, many of them diplomats. Paris carnage by terrorists from Syria raises fears on allowing migrants to flood into Europe. Several nations block arrivals even as the EU calls for greater understanding and empathy with their plight. Counter-terror intelligence sharing, border controls and terror financing dominate a usually business and economy-oriented G20 summit in Antalya, Turkey. Top world leaders pledge unity against the menace. Well, our top focus this week, the probe into the Paris carnage and the grief and solidarity in the aftermath. Amid forensic intelligence and raids around Paris, French police claim to have shot dead the mastermind behind the attacks and nabbed at least 8 major accomplices. Responsive action also extends to a stepped-up air offensive against the Islamic State in Syria. Here's a report.
168 police raids, some 40 detentions, 104 people put under house arrest, all in a space of 48 hours. Paris police was seized with a mission post the November 13 multiple attacks to nab every terror accomplice in the city. They also seized drugs, firearms, computer hard drives, telephones and other suspicious material. The biggest of the raids got underway in the wee hours of Wednesday. Some 110 policemen swarmed on the diverse working-class Saint-Denis neighborhood that's home to the Stade de France, where 3 suicide bombings took place days earlier. The 2 apartments in Saint-Denis that intelligence had narrowed in on yielded a big catch. The 7-hour operation led to the arrest of 8 suspected terror accomplices, 7 men and a woman. And the biggest catch of all, mastermind Abdelhamid Abaoud, killed by grenades and police bullets as another co-conspirator, a woman, blew herself up. The high alert in Paris is to stay though. Parliament extended the emergency by 3 months. The French Prime Minister raised concerns on use of chemical weapons for terror.
What is new is the operating methods, the nature of the strikes. The way they kill is constantly evolving. The grim imagination of those giving the orders has no limits. Assault rifles, beheadings, human bombs, knives or everything at once perpetrated by individuals or in this case by commandos very well organized. We cannot exclude anything today. And I say this with all necessary caution. But we know, we keep in mind that there could be the risk of chemical and biological weapons.
On the military front, Paris had announced intensified terror strikes against the Islamic State hours after the Paris attacks. Raids by 10 fighter jets were launched from the Persian Gulf and Jordan, bombing IS strongholds in Raqqa in Syria. French aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle has been deployed to the region, and a bigger crackdown is likely in the offing.
In France, the assassins wanted to kill the young in all its diversity. The need to destroy Islamic State is an issue that faces the whole of the international community. I have therefore asked the Security Council to hold a meeting as quickly as possible to adopt a resolution to mark this goal shared by all to fight against terrorism. Starting from now on, France will step up its operations in Syria.
Attacks like Paris have once again raised the spectre of hate crime as Muslims reach out to correct distorted views on the real Islam. Iranians living in France gathered at the makeshift shrine at the Bataclan Concert Hall, the venue of the biggest attack, to denounce the killings that were claimed by the Islamic State.
They do not represent any Islam. They are the heart of evil. They are no Muslim. They are enemies of Islam. They are the heart of evil. And we as Muslims would want to say, we are with French people. We are with all democratic values.
More than anything else, the last week since the biggest terror attacks Paris has seen has been about an outpouring of shock and grief and solidarity across all borders and continents. On social media, in the lighting up of world monuments in French colors, that empathy showed through and large, with a strong theme that it's only this empathy that can really defeat the fangs of terror. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Joining me for a chat this week to talk about this is Ajay Lele, who's part of the Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. Welcome and thank you for joining me on Rajya Sabha Television. Abdelhamid Abaoud, the mastermind of the French attack, strangely enough, the investigation that led to his killing in the end, there were several holes in the investigation itself. He was apprehended earlier but then let go, and then there were French officials as well as Belgian officials who said that he's probably in Syria and not in France. But as it turned out to be, he was right under their noses.
You see, what happens is that one has to understand that this came as a shock all of a sudden. They have been monitoring a lot of people in their own country. But you just can't point fingers to somebody because it's a vibrant democracy over there. So I think they had certain amount of compulsions that even though they were having certain amount of suspects, they were not trying to catch them red-handed because there was no, in that sense, evidence. But if you really look at this entire chronology of events which has happened post-attacks, today morning only the news has come up that particularly the woman who got killed, earlier French authorities had declared that she had a strip of explosives which was there attached to her abdomen. But I believe now they are saying that it was not even a woman and there was no suicide attempt which was made by her. So right now I think one can use a word from the classical warfare that is a fog of war. And there are certain amount of confusions and it will take some time for them to really establish and identify actually what had happened and who were behind these things.
Do you believe that France is, susceptible to more such attacks because the Prime Minister himself has come out and said that, there could be chemical or biological warfare or a chemical or a biological attack on France in the near future? Now, just the sound of it seems extremely scary, doesn't it?
Definitely. If you slightly look back to the history of France in the recent past, particularly because of the cartoon controversy, you had a major attack which was over there. Exactly. You had a major attack over there. The number of deaths definitely were far much lesser than what happened now. Particularly when one is talking of chemical and biological weapons, Syria has really shown that IS has got chemical weapons along with them. If you really look at the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons and how they are addressing the issue, I believe they have already addressed around 13 sites which were declared by Syria. But now Russians have come out with a certain amount of official and authentic information that there is one agency which is still holding chemical weapons in Syria and that entire region is controlled by the IS. So definitely now French people are fully aware that IS is in a position of a chemical weapons. Now the question is that whether they have already smuggled them into France, that is a very moot question. Other option for people like IS is that they can create chemical weapons in-house also. It's not a very difficult procedure. You get all the chemicals which are available in an open market. So if IS has got certain amount of, I can even use the word rudimentary technology, they will be able to create chemical weapons on the soil of France, and then there could be a larger danger.
Indeed. Ajay Lele, stay with us. I'm going to come back to you ahead on the program and get your inputs on another story that we're tracking here as well. In the meantime, of course, let's move on. Terror struck again on Friday this week, this time in Mali in West Africa. Gunmen stormed a luxury hotel in the country's capital, Bamako, leaving 27 people dead. At least 8 people are reported injured. Reports say that heavily armed men opened indiscriminate fire at guests at the hotel early on Friday. The hotel was hosting diplomats and other representatives for a peace conference. Officials said dozens of people were trapped in the building for hours before Malian and UN security forces launched a counterattack and rushed guests away. The siege ended close to 7 hours after the initial assault. A little-known extremist group, al-Morbiton, led by a former al-Qaeda commander, has claimed responsibility, saying the attack was carried out in retaliation for government aggression in northern Mali. The group also demanded the release of prisoners in France. France said it dispatched to Mali an elite paramilitary group trained in hostage rescue and counter-terrorism operations. President Francois Hollande pledged to provide necessary support to help Mali resolve the situation. Mali, which is a former French colony, has struggled with Islamist terrorism since a military coup there in March 2012. France had sent in troops in 2013 as the UN established a peacekeeping mission in the country. Meanwhile, Russia this week announced plans to sharply ratchet up attacks on the Islamic State in Syrian territory as investigations revealed that a bomb had destroyed a Russian jet that crashed more than 2 weeks ago in Egypt. Russia's security chief said an act of terror brought down the Russian A321 airliner in Egypt last month, killing all 224 people on board. Nearly all the dead were Russians. Russian President Vladimir Putin vowed to find and punish those behind the attack over the Sinai Peninsula. The Russian military said that it deployed cruise missiles, long-range bombers and other warplanes. Putin said that the Islamic State was receiving funding from at least 40 nations, including some in the G20. In a related move, President Obama said that he was open to cooperating with Russia in the campaign against the Islamic State. Russia had made the announcement soon after massive French bombings in Syria and agreed to coordinate with France in the strikes, moves towards a rare Russia-West unity.
Additionally, from the Russian territory, we deployed different types of long-range aircrafts. 12 long-range bombers conducted airstrikes targeting IS-controlled sites in provinces of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Strategic bombers launched 34 air-based cruise missiles targeting militant sites in provinces of Aleppo and Idlib.
Well, it's time to slip into a short break now, but still to come, more Boko Haram terror strikes in Nigeria. 2 terror attacks in the last week killed dozens. The group has in fact emerged as the biggest killer worldwide. We'll have that and much more on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, the Paris carnage wreaked by the Islamic State and one of the killed attackers allegedly even having a Syrian passport threw up a big question mark on the future of thousands of Syrian migrants, and they are getting asylum in Europe as well as other Western nations. Several governments and affected parties have raised concern over security checks on the immigrants being unready and ineffective. Here's more.
They fled home because of the death and destruction they saw all around them. Post-terror in Paris, there's one spotlight on them too. Fears that the men who wreaked the carnage there came from among them.
Because of the most recent attacks in Paris and the very real possibility that one of the terrorists entered France as a recent refugee.
If there's even the slightest risk that people who are coming in from Syria are not the types of people that we would want them to be, then we can't take that chance.
The responsible thing is take a pause in this particular aspect of this refugee program in order to verify that terrorists are not trying to infiltrate the refugee population.
The idea spread like a storm after the attacks in Paris. Keep the Syrian migrants out. Nearly half the US state governors, Republican senators, and even US presidential candidates, far-right leaders of several European countries, including France, they all rang out. Poland was among the first to shut its doors, Macedonia ready to put up a fence to bar the influx, Czechoslovakia has hit out. It's rooted in fear that the migrants could include terrorists who take advantage of these population movements to infiltrate and wreak havoc. The European Commission, UNHRC and other agencies stepped in for damage control, rejecting allegations and bombs.
We are concerned about the reactions from some states to end these very programs that would manage the flow of people that are being put in place, backtracking from commitments made such as for relocation, or proposing the erection of more fences or barriers.
Nothing would help more the propaganda of Daesh than to see a Europe closing borders to Syrian refugees. Nothing would help more the propaganda of Daesh than to see hatred expressions in Europe against innocent Muslims that are coming to Europe together with Christians, together with Yazidis, together with all other religions, fleeing the terrorism and the persecution in Syria and in other countries.
Besides the UN and several EU nations, including Germany, voicing the need to stay human, the US administration and Australia have said they will not forgo past commitments on taking in refugees. Nearly 8 lakh migrants have arrived in Europe by sea so far in 2015, while some 3,400 have died or gone missing making the journey. A majority of these people, nearly 6,50,000, are Syrians, coming in via Turkey and Greece.
Not mix the different categories of people coming to Europe. The one who is responsible for the attacks in Paris cannot be put at equal foot with real refugees, with asylum seekers and with displaced people. He's a criminal and not a refugee and not an asylum seeker.
Just a few weeks back, images like these had raised a wave of international sympathy for the Syrian migrants seeking asylum across the Mediterranean. Security fears have thrown that humanity to the winds. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, still with me on the program is my guest Ajay Lele of IDSA. Thank you so much for being with us. As far as the events of the last 8 days are concerned, how are those events really going to impact or affect the lives of refugees seeking asylum in some of the Western countries?
I think it's definitely going to impact. Officially, United Nations and other countries may not take a position, but definitely they are going to slightly look at that issue slightly more critically. Because today only United Nations Security Council has officially announced a war against Islamic State. So if they are one hand officially announcing a war, then definitely on other hand they will have to take certain amount of measures. Other aspect which one has to look at it is that when one goes to the recent history of a migration, it's not only Syrians who are migrating. People from Afghanistan, people from Iraq, even people from Pakistan have taken advantage of these sort of migration activities, and they have also tried to infiltrate these regions. So officials are not very sure that people from which are the regions which have emerged into their own countries. And particularly there has been lot amount of a flow of migrants towards Germany and to a lesser extent towards France. So definitely these two are most developed nations in the European region, and everybody wants to go and situate themselves into that country. So definitely, particularly these two countries, even though overtly they may be saying, but covertly definitely they will have concerns.
Indeed. All right. We'll have to leave it at that. Ajay Lele, many thanks for joining us on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Okay. Moving on now, of course, the Paris attacks shadow and the fight against terror dominated the G20 summit in Antalya, Turkey. The need to step up intelligence sharing, tighten border controls and choke terror financing dominated the summit's first ever joint statement as leaders condemned the Paris carnage. The two-day summit brought together the top leaders of the world with the G20's scheduled economic focus turning to terror. Here's more.
Leaders of the world's 20 most powerful nations observe a minute's silence for the 129 people killed in the coordinated attacks in Paris. The attacks just 2 days before the summit defined its central theme, the fight against the Islamic State, against global terror. The G20 summit is normally mandated to mull global economic issues. For the first time, this time, the G20 signed off with a joint statement against terror. We are resolved to address this threat by enhancing our cooperation and developing relevant measures to prevent and tackle this phenomenon, including operational information sharing, border management to detect travel, preventive measures, and appropriate criminal justice response.
I urge the participants to move beyond their differences so that they can push for a nationwide ceasefire, combat terrorism, and address key governance and constitutional issues. After years of division, this is a rare moment of diplomatic opportunity to end the violence and advance the search for a negotiated political solution.
Multiple meetings on the sidelines took up the road ahead. No landmark shifts announced, still no US troops on the ground in Syria, but an agreement to intensify the battle to wipe out the Islamic State and terror.
There will be an intensification of the strategy that we put forward, but the strategy that we are putting forward is the strategy that ultimately is going to work. But as I said from the start, it's going to take time. And what's been interesting is in the aftermath of Paris, as I listen to those who suggest something else needs to be done, typically the things they suggest need to be done are things we are already doing.
This morning I held talks with President Putin, and I urged him to work with the international community to support a transition in Syria away from President Assad and his ruthless brutality. We need to find a way to work together to bring this fighting to an end and to focus on the aim we all share, destroying the evil death cult which is ISIL.
All nations reaffirmed a rejection of terror being associated with any religion, nationality, civilization or ethnic group, vowing to keep in mind the UN's central role. Analysts say that post the Paris strikes, the US hand, its coalition and bombings may actually have been strengthened.
The Paris events paradoxically strengthens Obama's hand in terms of getting the other countries to. And that is, there's a window here where he has to be quite forceful and say to whomever, whether it's the Turks or the Saudis or the Qataris, look, this is our strategy, this is what we're going to do, and you're not going to interfere. You're going to help us, because there is going to be a price to pay if you don't. Because this is far too important, and the local calculations, the individual calculations of countries should not matter anymore.
Leaders termed the terror in Paris a shadow that darkened the world as a whole and united it like seldom before. The test now is whether that voice of unity can undermine a multi-pronged and rapidly rising terror monster. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television.
Let's take a look now at some other news-making events that made headlines across the world this week in Globe Watch.
Leaders of 19 countries gathered in Philippines' capital Manila for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC Summit meeting for discussions on growth and trade. Among the main centerpieces of discussions was the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which was agreed to recently by a dozen countries, including the United States. The accord envisages labor and environmental protections, the end of many tariffs and trade barriers among the member countries, and expanded markets for American goods and services. US President Obama hailed the deal. Obama also called on China again to halt construction on reclaimed islands in the South China Sea. 32 people were killed and at least 80 others injured in a blast that struck a market in the northeastern Nigerian city of Yola on Tuesday. The explosion occurred at a fruit and vegetable market beside a main road in Adamawa province. There was no immediate claim of responsibility, but the blast bore the hallmarks of militant Islamist group Boko Haram. On Wednesday, 2 female suicide bombers blew themselves up at a mobile phone market in the northern Nigerian city of Kano, killing at least 12 people and wounding around 60 others. Terror attacks by the Boko Haram have killed thousands in Nigeria over the last 6 years. The terror group wants a state adhering to strict Sharia law in the northeast. Iraq has been the worst victim of global terror, according to the Global Terrorism Index report for 2013-14 released this week. Over 9,900 people have died in 3,370 terror incidents here. Afghanistan is at second spot, Pakistan is fourth, India stands at sixth. The report says the Boko Haram is the world's deadliest terror group, having killed over 6,600 people ever, more than the Islamic State at just over 6,000. The Global Terrorism Index provides a detailed analysis of changing trends in terrorism since 2000 for 162 countries.
Well, let's shift focus now and bring you up to speed with some big events from sporting arenas around the world this week in our segment Sports Action. Russian athletes face missing the 2016 World Indoor Championships because a review of its anti-doping program will not be finished by March. Russia was provisionally suspended from World Athletics after an independent World Anti-Doping Agency report alleged state-sponsored doping. IAAF inspectors will start work next year to decide whether Russia can be readmitted to competition. Former All Blacks rugby union star Jonah Lomu died on Tuesday in Auckland, New Zealand. The news was made public by former New Zealand team doctor John Mayhew. Lomu, who was 40, dealt with a severe kidney ailment, nephrotic syndrome, since 1995, which forced his premature retirement from international rugby in 2002. He won 63 caps for the All Blacks during an impressive career which saw him regarded as rugby union's first global superstar. Australian fast bowler Mitchell Johnson has retired from all forms of international cricket. The 34-year-old took 2 wickets on the final day of the drawn second test against New Zealand in Perth. He is Australia's 4th highest test wicket taker with 313 in 73 matches and also took 239 one-day international wickets. Johnson was given a guard of honour by the New Zealand fielders and an ovation from the crowd as he emerged for his last test innings shortly before lunch on the final day in Perth. And finally, alongside prayers for peace on earth, looking ahead to the festive season and Christmas. An amusement park in Denmark, said to be the oldest in the world, has been dressed for Christmas with some 80,000 lights and thousands of Christmas trees and other festive decorations. I'll leave you with these happy pictures. See you again next time.